Hello internet! I recently presented this very presentation to about 95 people total and they seem to enjoy it. So I figured I'd share it with you as well. Nutrition is an incredibly messy field, so the aim of this video is to help you build a framework so you can begin to demystify it. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. Specifically, here's the game plan so we can navigate this nutrition topic with ease. First, we'll have an overview of food overall and the direction to move in when it comes to eating healthier. Then we'll get into why it's hard to eat healthier and what we can do to find balance and make this work. As in, we start general, then we get specific and into practical takeaways. I know this looks very vague, but it'll make sense what I mean by this. By the time this presentation is done, I hope to leave you a new framework of how we look at food, but also how we look at health and weight as well. Okay, so I spent 4 to 6 hours drawing this out. I know it's an absolute masterpiece, but what is it? What are we looking at here? Take a moment, take one guess, and of course it's mouth and teeth. That was never in doubt, right? This is an ode to Dr. Douglas Lau, who often starts his presentation with beautiful artwork, just as I have here. So the big question is, why do we have mouth and teeth? Well, it's obviously to eat, but what does eating give us? Like, why do we eat? Well, we eat to get energy, we eat to survive. And if I were to ask you, my listener, what do you like to eat? What are some of your favorite foods? I bet you didn't think of grass. Why not? Have you ever tried grass? Personally, I can't have it because I'm allergic, but I don't imagine it would taste too much worse than perhaps some spinach or some kale or some other leafy vegetables. And believe it or not, some people actually eat this stuff. But if we eat some fruit, it's quite sweet, and then we get into some of the favorite foods such as cookies. They obviously taste much better to us. So that's the first insight I have, that eating ice cream, So the first insight that you get from watching this is eating ice cream feels good. I know you're learning so much today. Please do take notes. There will be a quiz. That's a joke. There's no quiz. Don't worry. And then second up, I have another big secret. It just feels good to eat. People eat when they're stressed. People eat when they're happy, when they're sad. It's always a good idea for our brains to get some food in. So when it comes to our brain and our body, the one that tastes better is usually the one that has more energy to it or more salt. And that's because salt is rare mineral in nature. And really what our tongue and our brain is trying to do is trying to pick up calorie density. To be clear, calories are just for measuring energy. That is important. But I always talk about calories and calorie density. Why? Because our bodies aren't just looking for calories, but they're also looking for volume. In research, they usually call this energy density and use grams, but I'll use pounds here because it's easier to visualize. So the most calorie dense food we have is going to be oil, and that's because oil is pure fat, and fat is 9 calories per gram. Not a huge surprise, people know that fried food is quite calorically dense. Up there we have butter, which is mostly pure fat. And then somewhat surprisingly perhaps, we also have nuts and seeds up there, averaging about 2,600, 2,700 calories per pound. My absolute personal favorite, look at those perfect little squares. Chocolate is unfortunately about 2,300 calories per pound. When we get to pure sugars, carbohydrates are 4 calories a gram, so they're not as calorically dense as fat, but they're still pretty relatively up there. It is about 17 to 1,800 calories per pound. Now, I know we're not eating pounds of this stuff, so maybe we'll put this in units that we can better relate to. How about a tablespoon of sugar? Maybe we add this to our morning coffee, maybe we add a little bit of maple syrup to our oats, something like that. Well, that tablespoon of sugar has about 50 calories to it, and all of those calories are coming from carbohydrates. So most people would agree this is empty calories. Yeah, it tastes really good, but it's empty calories. There's nothing else to it. And most people would say it's junk food. Well, by that definition, then anything worse is also junk food, right? So then we can compare it to pure fat. In this example, we have olive oil, which is often touted as a health food. That olive oil in that 1 tablespoon has about 120 calories. It's all coming from fat. There's a little bit of vitamin E, a little bit of omega-3, but to get your daily amount for omega-3 or vitamin E, you will need a lot of olive oil. Thousands of calories of worth of olive oil to get those needs, and you'll end up with at least 40-50 grams of saturated fat coming in. So that's no way to get those nutrients. And then if we look at coconut oil, again, doesn't matter if it's olive, if it's coconut, if it's corn, canola, avocado. Because oil is pure fat, whenever we have a tablespoon of it, it's going to be about 120 calories. And coconut oil compared to olive oil is much higher in saturated fat, which is known to be a bigger risk factor when it comes to type 2 diabetes and potentially also heart disease as well. Next up, we have the meats at about 1,000 calories per pound. We have avocado at about 700 calories per pound. We have the pastas and the white rices at closer to 600 calories per pound. This is sometimes quite surprising to people because pasta is also made of flour, but something magical happens when we cook a pound of dry pasta, and it becomes 2 pounds of food. So calorie density gets cut in half because water comes in and water doesn't have any calories. In the same way, beans and lentils are lower in calorie density as well because we cook them in water and they're about 500 to 600 calories per pound. We also have brown rice, oats, and potatoes ranging from about 300 to 500 calories per pound. And then we have fruits, which are usually between 200 to 300 calories per pound. Then ranging from 60 to 200 calories, we have our typical vegetables and leafy greens. And of course, we have water at 0 calories per pound. So here's an overview of the foods I just covered. On the left there, I have calories per pound ranging from 0 all the way to 4,000. And then we have the various foods. The foods down here, they have something that these foods do not have that keeps their calorie density nice and low. So what is it that these foods have? Well, first they're gonna have water, but if I were to ask you which one's more filling, a medium apple or a small cup of apple juice, same calorie, same amount of water, same amount of carbohydrate, you would say the apple is more filling. Although it has water, that water doesn't necessarily keep us all that full. We can drink water all day long, and yeah, our brain gets a little bit of satiety from it in the moment. It's like, oh, something's kind of come in, but it quickly knows that no calories have actually come in, so we're still going to be hungry. Meanwhile, if we eat an apple, it has water but also has fiber. And that water and fiber combine together to slow down that digestive process and slow the rate of sugar entering our bodies. So digestion slows down a little bit, food sits in our stomachs longer, sits in our digestive tract longer, meaning that it's going to be more filling. I also want to point out a couple other things. First is just the scale of this. On one side, we have oil at about 4,000 calories per pound. Then we have vegetables at about 100 calories per pound. This means if we have a tablespoon of oil at 120 calories, that tablespoon of oil has more calories than a pound of some vegetables. If I were to give you a tablespoon of oil and ask you how much it fills you up, it doesn't do a whole lot for satiety. But if I were to give you a pound of some vegetables like broccoli, asparagus, spinach, cauliflower, that fills us up quite a bit. That's much more filling. The second thing I want to point out here, while fruits and vegetables are perfectly healthy, we all know they're good for us, everyone says they're good for us, that's a pretty common place of agreement in many different diet tribes. We also know that we can't necessarily eat fruits and vegetables all day long. I mean, we could, but we're eating pounds and pounds and pounds of food, and we're likely going to have trouble finding satiety, trouble feeling full and satisfied. So we need to find some middle ground. For this middle ground, the potatoes, the grains, these starchy vegetables, and legumes also, sometimes these carbohydrate-rich foods get a bad reputation, but that's where we actually want to be. If you picture yourself eating like a pound of bread, for example, instead of eating a pound of bread, you can eat 2 pounds of pasta or 2 pounds of rice. Which do you think is going to be more filling? In the same way with that oil, instead of a tablespoon of oil, you can have a medium boiled potato. And that's going to be about the same amount of calories, but that is the most satiating food that we know of, a boiled potato. And one of the reasons these carbohydrate-rich foods sometimes get a bad reputation is because, we lather the butter on there, we make them nice and greasy, we fry them up, or we cover them in cheese, and we just make them more fatty, you can say. And the only reason we're doing this is just to make the food taste better. Our brain gets pleasure from the salt, from the fat, and the sugar. So when it comes to those pathways, we can say that our brain isn't designed to eat healthier, it's designed to get calorie-rich food, and it does that by getting pleasure from, again, the salt, the sugar, and the fat. And by doing that, we're always striving towards calorie density, calorie-rich food. Our brain is saying, go eat calorie-rich food, not necessarily go eat the healthier food, right? And we intuitively know this. We know that eating healthy is somewhere in this direction over here, and we know that eating unhealthy is somewhere in this direction over here. So we're always in a little bit of conflict, and we'll touch on that again later. I also want to point out that the foods that our ancestors had access to is quite different from the foods we have access to. And when I say the foods of our ancestors, I'm talking well before Uber Eats or DoorDash or the McDonald's or even well before farming. And the foods that would have been the richest that we would have had access to wouldn't be oil or butter. It would have been nuts and seeds. Nuts and seeds involved the laborious process of finding some nuts and seeds and breaking apart these hard shells and gathering them and then eating them to get that higher calorie reward. It took a bit of work to do that. Then we would have had the meats at about 1,000 calories per pound. And then the rest of the chart would look exactly the same, right? We would have the vegetables, the fruit, the potatoes, the legumes as well. We wouldn't have the bread, the sugar, the cheesy, and definitely we wouldn't have had the junk foods. And also importantly, our ancestors would have gone periods without food. This is also why we can eat such a diverse diet and still survive. Because we went through periods of, you could say, like drought, you could say food wasn't available, and sometimes we had to rely more on hunting, for example, to get calories. Sometimes we had to rely on more potatoes, and sometimes we had to rely mostly on vegetables. We would have not had any junk food, cheese, sugar, or bread. We would have had meat, and meat was very important for survival because everything else here can vary seasonally. Our ancestors frequently had periods without food, and hence humans can fast while other primates can. And that at least the higher calorie density meats provided that little bit of calorie density for times when we really needed those calories. The foods we have in our modern environment are well beyond the imaginations of our ancestors. Could you imagine waking up and telling your fellow village, hey, I had the craziest dream last night. I saw what looked like poop, but it was harder than poop. And then I bit into them, and they were incredibly sweet, salty, and rich at the same time. They would have thought you ate some weird mushrooms, followed by some feces, and oh, he got high, and he basically ate a bunch of shit. And those are actually Twix bar in the photos. If your bowels look like that, then definitely come talk to me. Now, in our modern environment, while survival is ensured, there are unfortunate consequences because of the food we have available now. So the usual quick story I share here is right before I went to Europe. So we're going to see pleasure on the y-axis, time on the x-axis here. Picture me just eating rice and beans. Actually, it was summer, so I ate a lot of fruit. I love my summer fruit. Anyways, that's a bit of an aside. But yeah, just picture me eating relatively low calorie density foods and everything's kind of going great. Then the first day in Venice, my friends went to this cute little gelato shop and I decided to pass. You know me, I'm a health nut. But the second day in Venice, in a different gelato shop, there's this beautiful, dark, rich chocolate gelato that was just calling my name. And I heard it calling my name, I was looking at it, and honestly, it was love at first sight. So then I said, one scoop can't hurt, right? So I had that one scoop, and oh my god, it freaking took me sky high. Now, while the rest of my friends took a train to Rome, I flew there with that very scoop. But now I'm in Rome, and I'm having 3-4 scoops after dinner. What happened? How does that gelato taste now? Well, I got used to it. This is called neuroadaptation or habituation, and it basically says our nervous systems look for change, so we get used to stimuli. In other words, if you were to come over to my house and maybe it smells a little funny, 10-15 minutes later we get used to it. But now we're in an interesting spot because we're eating all these calorie-rich foods, all these junk foods essentially, and we're getting the same amount of pleasure as before, but whenever we try to eat healthier, and for me this was I basically bought a tub of spinach at a local supermarket and I struggled to stomach it. It tasted bitter, it was all weird in my mouth, and it wasn't like that before. The healthier foods actually taste worse because relative to the calorie-rich foods, the healthier foods are lower in calorie density, so when our tongue and our brain hits that, it's like, whoa. This is not the direction to move in. This is why the right thing to do often feels like the wrong thing to do, and the wrong thing to do often feels like the right thing to do. It's a very difficult situation to be in. And eventually we do get back to baseline. For food, this can be 2 to 3 months. That's actually a long time for someone to be without. That's actually a pretty long time. Most people don't stick to dietary changes for that long, right? For example, if you got rid of all the salt in your diet, I believe research has well established it's about 6 weeks before foods start tasting normal. But the more you do it, the more pleasure we do start getting from that food again. As in, the first day, it's like, oh my god, this tastes terrible. And then a week later, it's not so bad. And then a few weeks after that, it's like, okay, this is quite good. And we get back to baseline. I knew about this pleasure curve before because I learned it in my psychology class. However, I never thought about applying it to food, so I came across Dr. Lyle's work, The Pleasure Trap. It's a very interesting book that just talks about, you could say, human nature and what our instincts tell us to do regarding food and pleasure. And basically, the story just goes like this. We're at baseline, maybe we have a cup of coffee, we start having a cup of coffee, we get used to that coffee, then we gotta go through withdrawal to get back to baseline. It's also the same curve for other compounds as well, besides coffee or food. For example, you're at baseline, start smoking cigarettes, you get used to cigarettes, then you have to go through withdrawal to get back to baseline. For things like cigarette, it depends on how long someone's been smoking for, and it's a longer process than food. For other compounds like opioids, for example, this process can be up to 17 years, and that's because that's how hard the system is being hit. Ultimately, we're just an environmental mismatch for our whole lives, right? We weren't designed to be in this modern environment. It's quite different than what you could say our bodies are designed for. Now, this is something I mentioned briefly as well. We have this competing circuit situation in our brain where we have this short-term goal of getting calorie-rich food in, fighting our long-term goal of eating healthier. And it's usually that short-term goal that often wins. So let's get back to our discussion of calorie density. So we eat these rich foods, then we get used to eating these rich foods, and then healthier foods taste worse than they otherwise would have. So one of the larger consequences of this is obesity. Put simply, calorie density and body weight are in balance. As calorie density goes up, weight goes up. This usually happens slowly, but it adds up over the years. Most people get to their 40s and they realize they've gained quite a bit of weight, right? They see their family doctor is like, oh, your cholesterol's been kind of rising. It's a little on the higher end now. And then they come see me usually, or their blood sugar's a little high, or their blood pressure's a little bit high. But this is a process that's actually been going on for the last couple of decades. Again, calorie density goes up, body weight goes up. And this isn't a huge surprise. If we take someone and we feed them burgers and fries all day, well, their body weight's going to start to go up. But the surprise is it goes up at a different rate for everyone. And this is based on many different factors. The biggest factor is actually genetics. You've been on this planet long enough to see yourself, you've seen family, friends, coworkers eat relatively the same looking diets, but weight-wise, people look very different. And there's some other factors on the slide as well. And when calorie density goes down, body weight goes down. While those factors I mentioned are very important, it's also important to recognize that body weight always feels like it's in a direct control, when it's really not, which is why in my practice, I don't put a huge emphasis on it. It's much more important to simply eat healthier and live a healthier lifestyle, because this way the focus and the expectation is not strictly on weight loss, and any weight loss you experience will merely be a happy byproduct of eating healthy. And regardless of those factors I mentioned, as long as we swap one snack for another snack, one meal for another meal, as they move down calorie density, you will lose weight. The rate will vary, that's all. This is also why what works for one person doesn't work for another. So let's go into some of the deeper health consequences beyond any weight gain. On a weight note, I do want to add, it's not a personal fault, right? We're born into this world with these strange, rich foods, and we're basically designed to eat them. These foods are hyper or super stimuli for us, and when we have these foods nearby, it's not something we're supposed to moderate. Here we have some more artwork by me, another masterpiece, I know. So I'll point your attention to what looks like the inside of a worm. No, that's actually an artery carrying blood, and those little red circles are little blood cells. So around those blood cells, you'll see that I have very strategically and very carefully drawn negative charges. Our blood cells have celiac acids on them that make them negatively charged. This way, they don't hit into one another. It's like magnets, right? A minus and a minus, or a negative charge repel. A plus and a plus repel, but a plus and a minus attract together. That was me clapping my hands, bringing them to attract. But some compounds are actually positively charged, which gets the cells sticking together. Sometimes we need this, and this is natural. However, there's one compound that gets these sticking together, known as LDL. So LDL cholesterol is often referred to as the bad cholesterol. This is the cholesterol your family doctor is worried about. And the reason they're worried about it is because when these cells start sticking together, your blood goes from flowing like water to flowing more like a sludgy milkshake or like a smoothie, like a yogurty smoothie. And when that happens, it's a little harder to pump, which brings up the blood pressure just a little bit. When that blood pressure goes up just a little bit, then these cells, when they branch off into two different roads, when this one big road becomes two roads, basically some of these cells are always hitting this middle point here, and when they're doing that, they're usually bouncing off. Well, when that normally happens, our bodies are well able and well capable of dealing with it. However, when this repeatedly happens over and over again, well, then we start injuring our arterial walls, and this is one of the processes that sort of leads to this plaque buildup. And when we have this plaque buildup, sometimes that plaque can dislodge. It can block a vessel in the brain, leading to a stroke. It can block blood flow to the heart, leading to a heart attack, right? And this is why we're so concerned about this. So it's important to recognize that LDL's job is to simply just carry fat around. So anytime we start intaking more fat, whether it's oil, whether it's avocado, whether it's nuts and seeds, and LDL cholesterol will go up because that's the job of that fat. Sometimes with nuts and seeds, you won't see LDL cholesterol go up. And the reason for that is because there's a little bit of fiber in there. And that fiber actually helps our body, you could say, poop out some of that cholesterol rather than reabsorbing it in. So sometimes you see that effect. But if you have an otherwise fiber-rich diet already, then you're not going to see that as much. And you're going to see those nuts and seeds and the avocados and whatnot actually start to increase that LDL. So if you don't have a science background, that might have just sounded like a bunch of mumbo jumbo. And honestly, I could have told you how cholesterol attacks the walls and how our bodies can't keep up, but if you buy my supplement, Wall Defense 3000, that you'll be immune. I know once you leave this video. So to back this up, I want you to consider two things. One, let's revisit how filling fat is. Sometimes when people tell you, oh, fat is very important for satiety, feeling full, and they're not wrong. We do need fat for survival, and it is important. But our requirements are so low that any whole food will give us plenty. And ask yourself this. How filling is that tablespoon of oil? And again, compare it to that boiled medium potato, which is actually technically a little less calories in that tablespoon of oil, and you can see which one fills you up more. And what about the same calories in rice or pasta, or even a higher protein food like chickens or lentil? And two, intuitively, you already know this. If you ever gone for a run, gone in the gym, you already know that, hey, burgers and fries doesn't work well before. This example is a little unfair. That's a lot of food overall, but what if instead of oranges, we had some oats, plain rice, or a few boiled potatoes? And while we may not be professional athletes, we are using our brain all day long, and it loves to run on glucose. It loves to run on sugar, which is why it's so capable of using that sugar effectively. Okay, let's just have a quick summary of what we talked about so far. First, we're designed to eat the most calorie-rich foods. In doing so, we're in a trap where healthy food tastes terrible because it's essentially withdrawal. And in doing so, we look very different. The weight trickles on, what genetically would have been a 15-pound difference turns into a 50-pound one. I know there's a graph there, we're just going to skip it for now, but you can pause this video if you want to take a look at it. And in doing so, we experience poor health consequences that largely just stem from impaired blood flow. We're going to see higher rates of all of these. So cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, cancers, GI diseases, vascular dementia. And the biggest loss of all, in my opinion, is the loss of healthy years. We all work hard and gather resources for a future retirement, which in my opinion should be the best years of your life. You figured out your likes and interests, your kids are grown, but probably still living in your house, knowing this housing market. And this time is really how you want to spend it. But more often than not, I see people's last decade spent in a care home or needing care, and the years leading up to it, including joint pains, feeling tired or burnt out, cognitive decline, and the above diseases progressing slowly but surely. So we covered two topics there, two birds, one stone. Speaking of two birds, one stone, I recently learned that that's not how that saying works. Two birds, one stone is not to say doing two things at once. The purpose of the saying is actually to say, hey, it's actually really hard to hit two birds with one stone, which is why you shouldn't do it. Anyways, we did it though. We covered 2 for 1. But now let's get into the more practical side. What can we do? How can we put this into practice? Okay, so here's the situation. Every day we're gonna eat maybe 2-3 meals a day. And if we're having 3 meals a day, that's about 1,000 meals in a year. Research seems to show that we make over 200 food decisions a day. Am I gonna eat at 8:50? Am I gonna eat at 8:52? Am I gonna use this fork or that fork? How much should I warm it up in the microwave? Should I even use the microwave? Should I just have it cold? We can see how these decisions add up. And when it comes to what our bodies need, we need about 3 to 5 pounds of food usually. This does vary person to person, averaging about 550 calories. If we average about 550 calories, more or less, we're going to eat until we're full and satisfied, and then move on to something else. Okay, if you've seen Canada's food guide or even USDA's food guide, you'll see that one of the advices they have regarding a typical plate is to have plenty of fruits and vegetables, to specifically have about half the volume of your food from fruits and vegetables. And that's great. I have nothing really against that, but I will ask you, listener, do you know someone that does that? Have you been able to do that yourself? Personally, I've seen many people's diet, and I will say that most people do not eat like this or anywhere near this. What I'm really trying to stress is that there's this alternative option. Yes, veggies are nice. They add some bulk to the diet, the lower calorie density, but because they're so low in calorie density, we often don't want to eat them or eat many of them. But instead, the alternative route I have here is we make most of our diet starchy foods ranging from about 300 to about 600 calories per pound. We have a little bit of vegetables, again, to keep some variety in there. We keep a little bit of food between the 700 to 1800 calories per pound range. So like a little bit of meat, some eggs, a little bit of meat, some eggs, a little bit of bread. And the reason we keep these foods is because the way our brain is designed is we're going to have cravings for slightly richer food. So we want to satisfy those cravings, right? We want to do something that's going to be sustainable lifelong. And I have a spot here for foods between 1800 to 3000 calories per pound. And the reason I have that there is because technically you don't need it, but I know that this makes it a little bit more sustainable for people, right? This is something we can actually strive towards, and it makes sense. And those foods, they do cause injury, as in we eat some French fries and some fried chicken. Yeah, we are causing some injury, but the rest of the foods cause very limited or zero injury whatsoever, as in harm to the body. And because of that, it doesn't really matter if you even honestly, like on a Sunday, you had, I don't know, maybe it was football Sunday or something, you had a bunch of chicken wings, followed by some beer, and then maybe for dinner, you went out and had some fried chicken and fries. Basically, a lot of fried food is what I'm saying. The most calorie rich and the most harmful foods. Well, the next 5 days, you are back to your work life routine, and your body's going to recover quite well from that. So we're not going to run into problems there. And this way we get the bit of the best of both worlds, right? We can enjoy those times of celebration, those times when we're eating socially with friends and family, and we still get to keep our health. So in other words, the bulk of the diet is what we want to focus on, because that's where the biggest bang for our buck is. So what do I mean by starchy foods? So what do I even mean by starches? Well, there's different categories of them. We have the root vegetables, including potatoes, sweet potatoes, yams. We have the winter squashes, butternut and acorn. We also have grains like quinoa, oats, and rice. We have pasta Asian noodles, such as udon noodles. And we have our legumes, lentils, beans, and peas. Technically, legumes have much less starch to them, but I just categorize these together because they offer a lot of satiety and their calorie density is still closer to that 600 calories per pound. By eating these, we get volume in, we get to feel full and satisfied. Now I'm going to show you some real photos about how this looks like. Don't be scared, I did put some effort for these photos. First up is a very simple bowl I made. Basically at the bottom we just have rice, we have some greens, we have some chickpeas, and I just threw a bunch of Tabasco sauce and balsamic vinegar on it and called it a day. You'll notice that I didn't add any oily things to this because if I add even a couple tablespoons of oil, now all of a sudden a third of the calories or half the calories are coming from fat, are coming from oil, and not actually coming from all the nutritious stuff in there. Sometimes things start off quite pretty. There I have a little saute and a little steaming of some vegetables, including purple sweet potato. There I have a saute of some vegetables, including purple sweet potato, and then I mix it all up, added some lentils, and it doesn't look all that good, but I promise you that actually tasted amazing. That was one of the better times, and I kind of fluked it right. I'm not exactly following a recipe for that. This was very simple. I cut some vegetables up, I steamed them, and I seasoned them, and I enjoyed them. And that's what we need. This looks fancy, but this was a simple leftovers, no oil saute. I had some kidney beans lying around. I had some random vegetables, some peppers, and some carrots, and some corn, and I just sauteed them all together. And then I served it on top of some rice. This is a Indian chickpea-based dish, koche, which is actually traditionally oil-free anyways. And then I just had this with rice and a little bit of side salad. And here's some very pretty bowl photos that I made. So here we have actually a white rice and quinoa mix, as in I cook the white rice and quinoa together. And you can do this at various ratios as well. And then I just honestly, for those medium potatoes there, I just microwave them. I was making a bunch of bowls at once. I'll show you the other bowls in a second. So I just microwave them, cut in half. This looks like a lot of food, but because this food is so much lower in calorie density, I will say that I'll eat 2, 3, or sometimes even 4 or 5 times this amount. So totally okay to be eating more volume as long as it's lower in calorie density. And I know that can sound very strange because that sort of portion control approach to diet is very popular, but we don't want to be fighting our hunger. That's a fight we're designed to lose. Here's another bowl, bake some sweet potatoes, throw it on top of the same white rice and quinoa. And here's the third bowl, and this third bowl is a more Mexican style one. So I started with some pepper, some corn, and some onion, and I just sauteed those. And while I was sauteing those, I decided to add a little bit of salsa to that saute to add some flavor. So you could put some guacamole in the middle, but I didn't have any ripe avocados, so I just put some salsa in the middle to decorate it. And again, this is all on top of white rice and quinoa. So what are the big takeaways? Well, calorie density matters because body is looking for a balance of nutrients and volume. Fruits and vegetables are great, never limit them, but know that to get that long-term satiety, we need some of those middle ground starchy foods. A little bit of fish, a little bit of meat, some bread, even a little bit of sugar goes a long way to help with cravings and make this path sustainable for you. And last, calories concentrate incredibly quickly. Getting rid of a tablespoon or 2 of oil a day could mean hundreds of less fat calories coming in daily. Calories that would impair blood flow, worsen health, and also means that we can eat more of other food instead. Food that actually satisfies hunger. And that is it for this one. I know that was a lot of information, so if you have questions or need clarifications, please comment below. If you stuck around till the end, then you'll probably really enjoy this channel that I'm building, so hit that subscribe button wherever it is. This is Andy with Bane's Nutrition, and I will see you next time. Thank you.